Welcome to the Ironcenturion podcast, a Christ-centered adventure into leadership, manliness, and brotherhood. I'm Michael DeGroat.
I'm Tim Storm. We are here tonight with Ruedi Schubarth, who's one of the founding members of Ironcenturion, and we're here talking about that. We're here talking about our origin story and how Ironcenturion got started, why we got started. This is now 7 years down the road and kind of the journey that God has brought us on throughout this whole entire time. And we hope that it's an interesting story for you guys to listen to. But Ruedi is new to the podcast, so I'm going to introduce him real quickly. He's been a friend ever since college, has gone on to do some pretty incredible things with his life. He spent some time overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan as a civilian contractor, doing some intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance work for the U.S. government. And then he is now the lead professor of a UAV program at LaTourneau University, where we all graduated from. So super cool dude, awesome sense of humor, great with the dad jokes and the puns and the memes. Ruedi Schubarth, it's good to have you on the podcast.
Hey, for having me. Also, I love hanging out, talking to you guys, and we don't get to do it enough. So I like seeing your faces, even if it's on a screen. But anyways, yep, you guys are awesome.
Hey, Ruedi, good to see you. By the way, Ruedi, congratulations are in order. You were recently in the local newspaper for beating a bunch of children in a foot race. And
That's
your photos
right.
in the paper. I saw it. It was very good.
I'm glad you saw that picture. That was pretty awesome.
We'll go ahead and include that link in the show notes for you guys so you can see
My
his running
wife's-
prowess.
My wife specifically said, you'd better go run so that you don't run any kids over. And I definitely took out a 12-year-old girl. So that was, yeah.
Well, so where Ironcenturion came from really is also very intertwined with the story of our friendship. We met at LaTourneau. We became friends there. Ruedi has gotten stuck there. But that's where the foundations of Ironcenturion, really the seed of it, was planted, right? That's where this came from.
Yeah, there was a chaplain at the university at the time who saw all three of us individually trying to pursue this men's ministry, right? It was a mostly male campus with mainly aviation and engineering related degree programs at the time. So it was mainly dudes, but they had a women's ministry on campus, no men's ministry on campus. And the three of us individually were trying to seek a solution for that. And the university chaplain was like, well, how about the three of y'all meet and try to work on something together? So it was literally one of those pots where they said, here, you three, you guys sit down in a room and figure stuff out. And it's like, well, and here are my best friends now. So
That's awesome. I forgot about that. I was trying to pinpoint the moment or the time. I remember sitting at the coffee shop where we met for that meeting and instantly agreeing on everything. So that was a great beginning.
Yeah. It was strange to me that a university of that size, which is not very large at the time, it was 1,500 students on campus. It's probably not a ton bigger now, but it was very heavily male, and they didn't have a dedicated men's ministry. I guess they kind of figured that I don't know if they figured that the whole university was basically focused on that, or that men's ministry is something that belongs at the church level, not the college campus level, but there wasn't something specific. But
even the other ministries on campus were very much student led. So there were no other men at the time that were stepping up to do that if that was a need that they felt. So
that's a good point.
Something that we felt called to do.
And that was our frustration, right? Like even just sitting there at the table, looking around at all of our peers, basically asking, when does the transition happen from high school student to adult? Like, it's not here because guys are showing up to class in their pajamas. So, when does that click? And then, we just all kind of realized, hang on, there's nobody telling these guys what to do or where to go. And I'm sure they're wondering. And what do you know? We come up with a solution to that, at least in the microcosm that existed at the time, and it was wildly successful. So that was our men's fraternity study that we decided to go into. Right? We were like, hey, we could come up with something, or we could go to somebody that's already done it and use their material. Right? So yeah, that's kind of what we did.
Yeah, and that material still exists. They've rebranded it once or twice. At the time, it was called Men's Fraternity, and specifically, we went through a curriculum called the Quest for Authentic Manhood, which was good. It helped solve the pajamas question, right, in class, just like when does a boy become a man, and how does that happen, and how does he know? And it answers that key deep question that I think every man really has deep in his soul, and if he hasn't answered it well, that will cause problems down the path of his life. And so I think they've rebranded that now, and they call it Tim, do you know what they call it now?
I don't know.
I think it's called still Quest for Authentic Manhood. They dropped the men's fraternity, and then the other two studies are still around. So
okay,
they've re-recorded some of the sections, thankfully, because they were late '90s PowerPoints. But
do you remember the book artwork with all the guys standing on top of the mountain, like with fists pumped? And
yeah,
that was probably my favorite part.
Yeah, strong McGee and Me vibes.
And it was written by a pastor in Little Rock, Arkansas, Robert Lewis, and his team put it together. And I was exposed to Robert Lewis because my dad read a book that he wrote called Raising a Modern Day Knight. And it was about how fathers can sculpt and invite and usher their sons into manhood. And so my father read that, was inspired by it, and created some stuff that he did for and with me that was meaningful. And so then that's kind of where I was aware of Robert Lewis and some of his content. And it was really powerful to do that at Laterno. We had dozens and dozens and dozens of guys go through that program. And it was a year-long program during that year at college.
I was the MC for that. And I specifically, I took roll and head counts and all that. I remember we had 60 guys show up the first week, which was insane. And then we had 52 show up the second week, and consistently for one full year. That still bogs my mind. And then we finished the entire program. Like, we had 34 guys do that, our little final ceremony thing that we did. So that was such a neat experience. Michael, do you want to talk about that idea that you had that we did that was the last kind of last hurrah for that? Because that really taught us how to be successful at this whole making of men venture.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm remembering what you're referring to, we decided to culminate it with a ceremony. And if you read anything from Robert Lewis, we'll put some links in the show notes, because I think this is powerful, especially if you have a son. But one of the things that he is a big fan of is this idea of ceremony and capstoning things. And so based on that, we built a kind of final ceremony for everybody who participated. We had a bonfire. We did it off-site, off campus. We had fathers that were contacted ahead of time. They wrote letters to their sons that were very meaningful, that fit a bit of a formula. We invited them to write with some life words in there. Some fathers actually came, that we invited them to come if they were able to, and to speak those words directly over their sons. There were tears in good ways there at that event. We had men. We used the knighting analogy a little bit. We had a sword there that we kind of knighted men with, and then in the company of other men said, "We affirm biblical masculinity in you." Not meaning that it maybe wasn't there before, but that it's now been deepened, and we're honoring and identifying that.
I think that was a really key point, because in our culture, in the American culture, and really a lot of Western culture now, you don't have these types of ceremonies that happen anymore. It was very common, in the Jewish culture, for example.
It still is with the
bar mitzvah, right? Yeah. In a lot of other places around the world, you have this ceremony that now says, from here on out, you are going to be treated like a man in our society. In our culture, like Ruedi has said, there was that question that loomed even as college kids, like, okay, when some of my parents' friends have maybe told me they can stop calling them by their last names, but like, when does this like official transition happen? What does that look like? What are my new roles and responsibilities? And no one is really defining that. So this was, in my life, huge, because I was going through it kind of as a participant. You guys had been through a similar ceremony in your own lives. So you guys were kind of emceeing that event. I was invited to take part in it as a participant, which I just remember being deeply impactful on multiple different levels. One, because my dad wrote me a letter that I still remember to this day, and I think I still have it because it was that important to me. And two, because y'all also invited the women's ministry to stay behind and pray for us in the back. And lo and behold, there was a certain blonde girl that was back there that was praying for me and telling me how proud of me she was for all the different ways I'd changed throughout the year and had grown. And it was in that moment that I knew, I was like, we're going to get married. And we did.
3 kids later.
Yeah. So Yeah, that was a really meaningful evening for me.
Ceremony is an important thing, and so it's how you kind of cap off or identify certain milestones. And you're right, our culture says you become a man when you turn 18, or when you graduate high school, or when you lose your virginity. You're like, you become a man. Mm-hmm. And those are all stupid, empty, meaningless metrics, because age isn't a good metric. Masculinity, true, authentic manhood isn't a number. It's not an age. I know lots of people who are just sadly overgrown boys because they haven't matured fully in some of these things.
Even old men, right?
Right. That is sometimes the case. Yeah. So that's really what forged us together early, and really kind of gave us the taste that men are hungry for this thing. Yes, they were in college, but men are hungry for something like this. And I remember personally, I think that's true for you. After leaving college, I felt a loss of that connection and the ability to minister to men in this way, after not being able to, do it like I was doing it while we were there at school. Did y'all feel that too?
Absolutely. And, we missed out on the adventures too, right? Because I'd gone on adventures with both of you in college. Michael, you and I went up to the mountains for spring break that one year and snowshoed and did all sorts of crazy stuff. Ruedi and I, we'd gone camping and, done all sorts of cool stuff like that. But it was just like that sense of adventure and wanting to get away and go do something grand didn't seem to exist in corporate America when we left the university setting.
Or go ahead, Ruedi.
Well, I was going to say, add on top of that, look, do I go to the young adult church ministry? Do I go to the men's ministry? The men's ministry is all, they seem like they already have it figured out. And I struggled. I went to a local church and tried to ask about a men's ministry. And they said, we don't really have a lot of that. There's some guys that get together for breakfast on Thursday. Maybe you could give them a call. And I called them and they're like, no, we don't really take new guys. So I was like, well, what do I do? So it's the same kind of, there's still a vacuum for, that furthering maturity outside of, just the incubation, our college experience.
Yeah. That was my experience too. I wasn't turned down so directly, Ruedi. That's rough, but yeah, I had the same feeling. Like, I went to my church, I attended their men's ministry, and I was like, okay, I just don't feel like this is the right life stage for me. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just not the spot for me. It's mostly people who are far older than me, who are asking and needing answers to questions that I don't need answers to. And they do a lot of sitting around round tables and staring each other in the eye and talking about stuff from workbooks, which isn't necessarily bad, but there was a hole in my soul that it wasn't filling. It didn't feel like it wasn't the right fit for me.
Yeah, I remember going on a men's retreat, and they made us write a journal, which I found a few years back. I think I sent you guys some pictures of the journal entries I made. And I was just like, I was angry because I was like, I don't know why I'm here. This makes no sense. The guys just want to sit around and talk about their emotions and their feelings. And, I was just frustrated because it was a room full of, older guys, probably in their 40s and 50s at the time, so as a young, 22-year-old fresh out of college like that, they just seemed like they were ancient, which is funny now. But they were just talking about how they totally wrecked their lives. And I was just like, how do I end up not being like that? The stories of their families being lost to drugs and alcohol, addictions that they'd had and other things. And I was just like, how do I stay off of that path? What is or how are the ways that they went, and how do I do the opposite of that?
Yeah. And the desire to find, in college, it was so easy, or at least it seemed easy, because we were surrounded on a campus with like 1,000 other guys our age. And you may not be friends with all of them, but how hard would it be to find 4 or 5 that are going to be friends? But all of a sudden now I've got a job and I'm one of the only people my age at the office, and church men's ministry isn't. So just where do I find and connect with friends? How do I cultivate those relationships now?
and I wish I could say that's a problem unique to 22-year-olds, but it's not, as we found out, as we've gotten older, because you don't get less responsibilities the older you get more. You get married, you have children, and those free times and free moments that you had to go and sit somewhere and hang out with some guys, and play cornhole or something like that. Those times are gone, right? Because suddenly your schedule is now full with family activities and work activities that you weren't responsible for as a 22-year-old. So it is a problem, coming straight out of college, but it's certainly not any less of a problem for guys in their 30s and 40s and on.
Well, that reminds me of the old joke, right? The joke is, yeah, I know Jesus rose from the dead and he healed sick people, but the real miracle is that he had 12 close friends in his 30s. And that you kind of laugh, but then you go like, oh, ouch. Like, yeah, because you start counting the number of close friends you have who are truly close and are truly friends of yours, not just acquaintances or people you know, or somebody whose phone number you have or Facebook connection, but like they know you, and you start running out of fingers, or not, you start running out of names before you run out of fingers real fast.
So it was probably around 4 years after I graduated, so 5 years after you guys graduated, that we, I think, all kind of hit that pain point, at a critical juncture in our lives where we're just like, this isn't working. We need to do something about it. And like when we were back in college, we sat down in a room and said, well, let's work the problem. Let's figure this out and come up with a solution. So we wrote down some of what our pain points were. And we just said, well, if we had to make a men's ministry from the ground up, what would that look like? Right. And we started looking at some of our past, and at this point, Ruedi had spent some time overseas with his special operations customers. Michael, you'd done some crazy things like kayaking the Mississippi. I was in the middle of some Army leadership training that I was going through. We came up with some similar answers. The times that we were closest with other men were when we were going through times of just pure adversity with other guys. So you can think of that as like a high school football team, or a basic training class, something like that, where it's like you are being put under a tremendous amount of pressure that's externally applied. And you have to bond with those guys, or the team doesn't work, or the mission doesn't get accomplished. And we said, well, how can we do that outside of those environments? And we came up with some different ideas. I don't know, Michael, Ruedi, you guys want to jump in and talk about how we maybe thought to solve some of those problems?
I was deployed and traveling around the world and the country and all that stuff. And I remember specifically just kind of sitting back and watching you guys, the masters at work, coming up with these ideas. You guys were roommates at the time, at least it's part of the time leading up to this. And so it was really cool just watching this grow. I think I said something like, just like, whatever you guys want to do, I'm in. So it was cool for me because I didn't have to do so that's one thing. I don't remember how we got the name. So you guys have that in your minds.
Yeah, how we landed on the name Ironcenturion for this thing. Yeah. I do know one thing that I'll point out too, that's interesting. And I said it at the time when it was on one of the names we were brainstorming. I was like, let's do something super creative. We're going to make it one word, Ironcenturion, even though it's kind of two words, it'll be one. But I was like, what'll happen though? People are always going to separate it when they write us. Like, so when we get emails, it's going to be Iron Space Centurion, or they're going to capitalize the C in the middle of the word. And it's not, it's just the I is capital. It's all one word.
This deeply bothers Michael, by the way, if you send him an email. To this day, he knew it was going to be a problem when he did it, and he did it anyway.
but the idea, the principles are still true, regardless of how you spell it or where you put a space. No. The idea of iron calls to mind that idea of iron sharpens iron, right? So there's that idea of brotherhood as part of the organization.
I think even deeper than that too. Like, iron is an element that comes up out of the ground and is formed, right? So there's this concept of something that starts out as a raw material and can be formed into something like a sword, right? That's totally different than the ore that came out of the ground. So I think there's this process of development that happens in iron to make it valuable.
Absolutely. And we currently say, Ironcenturion, we use the tagline from time to time, forging leaders. And the idea of this forge is this process that is painful, but it takes something that is real, but makes it something that is more useful. It turns it into something that can be used for different but more noble, grander purposes. And that's what we want in our own lives. I want my raw material to be refined and forged so that I can be used for more noble purposes.
And if I can add too, I was earlier this afternoon. Well, I bought a set of wheels off Craigslist. Okay, and what I didn't realize, even buying wheels here in Texas, they came off a truck that was from the north, and so they had some salt damage on it. And it came with brand new tires. So I basically got the brand new set of tires and wheels for free. So so I was in the process of cleaning them up and working on them. And it's going to be a lot more work than I anticipated. Status quo for me, thanks. But the
that's all our DIY projects, right? Like that's what always happens. Oh, this will be easy, and then it's like 3 weeks later, and you're finally done. I'm never doing that again. Oh, what else can I buy on Craigslist?
If you didn't go to Home Depot 4 times in one day, it wasn't a project.
Absolutely, exactly. So it's been one of those. But as I was grinding away at the corrosion on the rims, I was just thinking, you know what? Kind of gravitate towards these products because it is restorative. There's a redemption process that happens through taking something that was useful, been disused, either abused or unused, and then restored through extensive process. It takes a lot of work. Trying to look ahead to the amount of work that this is going to take. I was just thinking, you know what? God doesn't give up as rusty as I get. He doesn't give up, right? And he keeps going. So even more just iron, the picture of iron, if it's not used, it gets rusty, right? If it's not oiled and cleaned and well kept, heated, and all those things that we know about, it's gonna get rusty and wear away. It needs to be used.
Man, that's excellent. And so that brings us to Centurion, right? So the other part of this, Centurions we wanted some military connection, some form. Many of us have a military background. I say us as if it includes me. It does not, but there is a military connection with Ironcenturion. But a centurion was a Roman leader. He would lead a section of military unit. It kind of builds off that word for a century or 100. So he'd have somewhere between 80 to 100 men in his command. And so the idea is we're leaders of others around us. And then also it happens to just have a neat connection to the Roman Empire. And so we've played off of that as just a past formidable empire and military force.
And we've had people ask us, well, didn't the centurions kill Jesus? And it's just like, technically, yes. However,
I mean, there were centurions that Jesus commended for their faith too, right? So
exactly,
I mean,
the first example you
really
see among Gentiles of actually being converted to Christianity is a centurion, right? With Peter going to his house. You see that even before that with the example of the centurion who has his servant healed by faith. And Jesus says, not in all of Israel have I seen anyone with faith like this, right? So we see examples of these men being leaders, but also men being, willing to see the truth and see Jesus for who he was, even when that probably wasn't popular back in the barracks. But this was, we see some upstanding centurions listed throughout Scripture. So,
but I love that. I love picturing that interaction with Jesus, where they're walking throughout the land, there interacting with the sick and the Pharisees and the people they come in contact with, and then he gets the centurion. And he's like, dude, you get where can I get more of you, right? So it was neat. So so I'm glad we settled on that for sure.
Yeah, and so that's where Ironcenturion kind of came from, and that's the mix of those ideas, try to put those into a name or a word. And so we made up a word, and we take two that are words and smash them together. And that's now the name.
So it's also what happens when you get non-marketing people, because people never remember what it is. So it's kind of kind of just been like long running joke of, we picked a name that no one remembers, but it has meaning. So it's valuable, right? So I'm trying to think of what some of the other driving forces were. And, I want to give some credit to some other sources as well. Number one is Clint Spradlin, who was another founding member, was massively influential in this process as well. Clint was a guy that served as the sergeant of the guard at the White House during the Bush administration. So he was, when you see the Marines in front of the White House that are standing there and, guarding the White House, that was his, the men under his command. And Clint was very, very much about training men in discipleship and training men to do cool, manly stuff. So Clint Spradlin was a good driving force at the beginning of Ironcenturion. We also had influences like the book Wild at Heart. That came out around the time we were all in college and was wildly popular and massively influential in kind of our understanding of what does this journey of masculinity look like? Because prior to that book coming out, I'd say that there weren't a whole lot of like driving examples of what that should look like from the Christian culture. Obviously, Hollywood and everything else told men what we should look like at that time. But that was, for me anyway, that was one of the biggest moments I saw like, oh, this is a possibility of what that looks like.
Yeah, I remember that specifically. That book was extremely popular. I think it was tapping into the same thing we accidentally tapped into with doing men's fraternity on campus. And it's the same vein that other things have tapped into since then. You can think of things that are specifically targeting men that are just extremely popular. I think it's because there is that deep craving at the core of men's souls to say, am I a man? Well, then actually even deeper than that, what does it mean to be a man? What does that mean? And how would I know if I am? And then what is a man supposed to do? And those questions are being asked by lots of people. I think they still are being asked by lots of people.
Right.
And go ahead, Tim.
Well, I think that's where, we get into some of our core values, right? Of what are some of these things that we were founded on that we wanted to do and be intentional from the get-go about, okay, if we're going to start a men's ministry, what does it need to look like? We kind of built this from the ground up of, there has to be a core foundation of spiritual development, right? We can't just be out here to do the machismo stuff and blow stuff up and shoot guns and call that good. Because that's no different than what the world's offering.
Although we do that stuff too.
We absolutely do that stuff because, it gets our blood pumping. Michael and I got out on the range today and we got to shoot fully auto MP5s. And it was, my heart, is still probably beating a little bit fast because of how cool that was.
Not as fast as those bullets were flying.
I'd probably be dead if that was the case. So that's a good thing. But there's this, this element of adventure and, doing cool stuff that we wanted to be incorporated, but not at the detriment of also focusing on things like spiritual development. So Ruedi, what were you going to say before I cut you off there?
Well, I was just going to mention that I had a mentor ask me point blank. I was in his office going through some sort of difficult situation, and he asked me again point blank, "Are you a man?" And I was like, and I sat there. It felt like 6 minutes. It was a couple seconds, but it felt like a really long time. And then I realized through that, I had to figure out, okay, what is that? What does it mean to be a man? What is my perception of that? Do I meet my own perception? Is that accurate? Do I have an accurate perception of that? Right. So, and then after some indeterminate time, I was like, yeah, I am. And so that kind of set me on that course. And then I really enjoy asking that question to men today, even that come in my office as a college professor now, and they can ask me questions, the same sort of questions I was going through. And sometimes if it's appropriate, I'll ask them that question. And I've had, about a 50 split with guys of that age, like the 18 to 24-year-old range, where some of them are some of them don't hesitate. They're like, yes, give me more. And I've had some guys think about it for a few seconds, and they're like, no, I'm not. And it's kind of that picture of the young man walked away disappointed because he didn't, because he couldn't let go of that picture. So so that became important for us to try to define, what is our picture of what that looks like. How do we, when people come to us asking that question, and we ask them, how do we define that? What are our core values and that sort of thing, right? So, man, those conversations were really cool, and I love, as we come up with new, what we call operations, our events and things. We're coming up with new ways to spin, devotional talks and things. As we're developing a discipleship curriculum, every time we come up with this conversation of needing a symbol or needing a value or whatever, it's just the coolest experience that we get to go through as a group to forge those out. So so that's kind of where our core values came from too, right? And those are they're 4, which is easy to remember. I can never remember 5 things. I don't know if you guys have that problem. I can always remember 4. I'm like, there's one more. What was it? So 4 was a good number to me.
Yeah. So our tenets of leadership, that was something that we kind of developed early on when we realized that, what does a leader need to look like? Because as Ruedi mentioned, like there's a lot of ambiguity right now of, what does a man look like? How do you know if you're a man? So we sought out to answer the question, what does a leader look like, to help, answer that question in some way. And we came up with 4 principles, and it's, we call them our 4 tenets of leadership. And a leader follows first, a leader holds fast, a leader loves deeply, and a leader points Christward. Michael, you want to kind of unpack some of those and what those mean, and also where those are rooted in? Because I think that is absolutely essential to this whole conversation.
Sure. There's a couple of these that are really visual imageries for me. And then one that seems oxymoronic, which is the first one, which is a leader follows first. Because we have this image in our head, right, of a leader is the one who's not following. A leader has followers. But the truth is we all follow something. We by creation, by design, we follow something. We need a outside ourselves thing that we pursue and follow. And so you can see this in the lives of people that don't have a clear set of guides. They will just follow whatever makes them feel good. So maybe it's drugs or sex or money or popularity. They just follow after that. It becomes a thing they pursue. And so we feel it's very important that a leader needs to know, be self-aware and identify what is it I'm pursuing and following. And then you need to follow something good. So Christ says, Matthew 16, you get the idea of pick up your cross and follow me. That's what Jesus says. And so a true leader is one who recognizes and has heard that call and is following first and foremost after Christ. No one does well in a situation where they don't know who their commanding officer is. You need to know where you're getting your orders from and where your allegiance is supposed to lie. The second one is hold fast. This is the one that's got a lot of imagery for me. Every time I hear this or see this, I imagine a ship at sea in the 1800s. Maybe it's a cargo ship. Maybe it's a pirate ship. Maybe it's a British Navy vessel. It doesn't matter. What matters is the storm. There is a big storm, lots of waves, lots of wind. You can smell the salt because it's on everything. And there's this guy that is holding the rope that goes to the main sail, and he's got it pulled tight, and he needs to hold that sheet tight for the ship to be safe in this storm. And you can see it tattooed on his knuckles. It says hold fast. And as he's in the weather holding this, it's the symbol of longstanding perseverance in the same direction. And as leaders, we want to be strong rocks. We want to be identifying points, towers that others can look to gain guidance from, because they know what we stand for. And we're going to continue in the same direction. John 15, for example, we see it in scripture where Jesus says, abide in me, this longstanding, continual, live in these decisions you've made for a long time.
Yeah, and I think that one is super interesting to me as well, especially choosing that John 15 passage, because it doesn't say explicitly hold fast, right? But that concept of holding fast, is, I think, perfectly played out in that John 15, 1 through 17 section there, where Jesus is saying, make your dwelling within me, make your fortress me, right? And I think as followers of Christ, like, that needs to be our absolute go-to. We talked about earlier, that men's retreat that I went on, where guys were just kind of like laying off like dead bodies to the left and the right side of the road, right? And we're trying to figure out how not to become that. In a very real sense, this is how that happens, right? Like, if we continue to hold fast through that storm and not let go, that's what it takes. That's what it takes to constantly be pursuing. And it's not on our own strength, because Lord knows that I would not be able to do that on my own strength. It is through the power of Jesus Christ that allows us to hold fast and stay the course. But there is definitely a part of us that's responsible for, holding onto that rope.
And it speaks to the first one too, right? Because in Matthew, and there's another way that he says it or that it's recorded in Luke. It's not just pick up your cross and follow me. Daily pick up your cross and follow me, right? You have to continuously make that conscious effort to do that. And like Tim, like you were saying, in Ephesians, it says, I was dead, but God came in and restored me. So, but we have to daily go back to do that. We have to hold fast to those things that we know that are true, and continue to do what we know. So,
and this is different though than a man or a leader pulls himself up by his own bootstraps. This is not that.
Right.
Although there maybe is some connection. This has got a lot of
Right.
true grit in it. It's got a lot of steadfastness, and it's not just spiritual. It's this. This is you swear to your own hurt and don't change. That means you make a promise. It becomes inconvenient for you to keep it, but you keep it anyway because you made a promise. Right. I personally, I'm sure we all know somebody who's broken a promise and left us hanging because it became inconvenient for them to keep it. Not like significant life trauma got in the way, but just, but I really want to sleep in, or, but I want to go to this concert instead. And this says, don't do that. Stick to what you said you're going to do. We also probably know the guy who's just perpetually exhausted with what work he does. And so the novelty wears off and he switches jobs or careers, or he's the serial entrepreneur who's never really successful. Just every 3 or 4 months, he hops to the next new exciting thing. There's a lot to be said for perseverance.
I think in the modern world too, we see that in the self-help kind of arena, right? There is definitely, you can't do it on your own. There's so many self-help techniques and self-help gurus and influencers, and you got to try this 5-step method to becoming a true man, or do these 10 moves and your wife will love you. Like, it's all these things that are like, hey, that's the one that'll do it this time, right? So it's much more than that, and still is people trying to do it on your own power. I love so much about this because it is such a deep meaning, right? We have to follow first. We have to acknowledge Christ as Lord in our life, but there's still a personal responsibility to receive that, right? To pick up our cross and follow me. And that, for me, that means putting my side. I gotta, whatever selfishness that is driving me towards the grave, really. Whatever my self-seeking tendencies are, I need to put that aside and follow Christ. Not put that aside and do what my family wants to do necessarily. That's not what that means. Not put myself aside and go to work for 60 hours a week. That's not what that means. Like, people still try to pursue those things in that way, right? But those are my own efforts to follow first. But if he says all you gotta do is pick up your cross and follow, die to that old self, follow me, And then the life that I give you will flow out into those relationships, into your work, into meaningful, the meaningful things that God has put you on this earth to do. And so I love that we can talk about it in this forum. I love that we can share that and get other guys excited too. Man.
Well, and that leads right into the third tenet of leadership, which is loves deeply. And so you were right. touching on that already, and they just kind of flow really well together. But it's the idea that you love very deeply, selflessly those who are around you. And so that would include your wife, that includes your kids, that includes your parents, it includes your employer and your employees. It includes your students that sit in your class. It includes your coworkers. It includes your neighbor, which pretty cool, kind of interesting idea. If you think of your neighbor as literally your neighbor, like the one who is near you. And so you think of the guy who asked Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus is like, basically Jesus says, it's the people who are near you. And so those who live near you, those who are near you in traffic on your commute that you're doing every day to the office, those people, love them deeply. We see it in 1 John 4, where he says, we love because he first loved us. And how deeply did Christ love us?
Yeah, I think that's really the defining point of this one. Is it isn't, the Hollywood love, right? It's not love your wife until it gets difficult. It's not love your coworkers until they annoy you. It's not, the list could go on, right? This is love the way Christ loved you. And again, it's one of those, just like the other two principles before this, would be impossible to complete on your own power. We have to complete this through the power of the Holy Spirit that dwells inside of us, or we're not going to be successful at it at all. We've seen marriages fail because guys wanted to love their wives on their own power and didn't realize, nope, this is a lifelong decision that requires you to do this out of Christ's strength. And it's designed for your sanctification, and it's going to be difficult, and loving others will be difficult. That's something that we know experientially, and it's something that we know from Scripture as well. But again, being rooted in an understanding of Scripture and being rooted in an understanding of how that applies to our lives is, I think, absolutely critical to our growth as men. And it's definitely something we try to impart that sentiment on the guys that come to our programs, come to our operations. Just this process of, you need to be living your life with the lens of Scripture as the lens in which you view everything through.
Tenet number 4 is that a leader points Christward. This is the idea that the way we live our life should point and indicate others toward Christ. That a leader points others with their actions, with their words, with how they spend their time, with how they spend their money, the things they say they value, shows others Christ. And so you see this in the Great Commission, where Jesus says, go and make disciples. We see this in 1 Peter 2, where we are called a royal priesthood. The idea is that our job as image bearers, we are physically image bearers and spiritually image bearers of God because we are created that way. We are created in his image. And we should make sure that we reflect that image well. And so we point others to Christ.
Yeah, and that image of a royal priest is pretty cool too, because, you think about it, the ancient Israelites, they had a king and they had a priest. In Christ, we see for the first time the two of those meshed, right? The king's responsibility was to represent God to the people. The priest's responsibility was to represent the people to God. And in Christ, we have that first example of an intermediary that goes in between and can do both jobs because he is pure and blameless, but he is also righteous and the Lord of Lords. And what we see in Peter here is shocking, because it's saying you are a royal priesthood, right? Like, Christ built his church in his people. The tabernacle exists in his people. The Holy Spirit dwells inside of us like it dwelled inside of the temple, like it dwelled inside the tabernacle. And now we are that representation on earth, spreading the love of Christ to and among the people of God. and representing both the people to God, that need to know him, but also God to the people. And that's a very high calling when you think about it in those terms. And it's a very cool responsibility that I think demonstrates a lot of spiritual growth and development when you get to a point in your walk with Christ. That's something that you're able to live out.
I think we've had this conversation about where we came from and kind of why, and maybe this is resonating with people who are listening and go, wow, this is really cool. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't include in this conversation. So what did this lead us to do? So we created Ironcenturion. Ironcenturion creates and makes outdoor adventure and adversity events for men that infuse spiritual development moments. And so we have weekend-long events where we teach wilderness survival and tenets of leadership and spiritual development. We have urban events where we teach spycraft type skills, lockpicking, physical fitness stuff. We do events where we teach precision rifle shooting. We've got a range we've used that goes out to a mile, and we can shoot really far. And we do those all wrapped though into the idea of getting men shoulder to shoulder engaged in the same task, but then infusing as well intentional spiritual development conversations around these leadership principles. And so you can find out more about events that we're doing, whether it's a full weekend event or like a day-long event, on our website at ironcenturion.org. You can send us an email at podcast@ironcenturion.org. And if this kind of thing would be something that, wow, this is something I need in my life, there are ways that you can make this happen in your life.
And I would also encourage the guys that are like, we've talked a lot about grit and difficulty and adversity and all those different words that get thrown out. And we get a lot of guys that are just like, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Right. And Ruedi, what would you say to one of those guys that's sitting in those shoes, maybe on that side of the fence?
Well, I like to say there's something for everybody, for sure, to be sure. And it's not about, let me take that guy that is saying maybe it's not for me, and I'm gonna take him by the face. I'm gonna say, you need to come, because it's if you think there's nothing for you, I think when you can kind of stop thinking about yourself. Again, that's what that adversity does, right? When we get shoulder to shoulder in a task, trying to light a fire with wet sticks and leaves and stuff, like that's really hard. But trying to figure it out with other guys, like you forget about yourself. You forget about those like hesitations and insecurities and things that you have, and you're focused on this task at hand. So that's why I would encourage anybody that is on that maybe of it. And we definitely acknowledge it's not for everybody, right? Not everybody is a swashbuckling outdoorsman, and we don't expect that, right? And that's not at all the stereotype even of the other people that show up. But certainly it doesn't hurt to expect to be challenged a little bit. And I think that sort of lifestyle is attractive to a lot of people, but they never follow through with it, right? Because there's so much safety in the life that we build around ourselves, in being predictable and us being in control, right? I like being in control. I like when I can control my schedule, when things happen that I don't expect. It can be really stressful, right? Case in point, tonight, my kid spread packing peanuts all over the floor, 10 minutes before I'm supposed to be on this podcast. And
man,
who's like what?
who sent you a bunch of packing peanuts?
I don't know. It was a package showed up. That
was me.
yeah. So right. So, but and it really, who was it? Theodore Roosevelt or somebody said, you learn the most about yourself and how you react to things that you're not in control of. It was Theodore Roosevelt or C.S. Lewis, probably C.S. Lewis. That sounds like something he would say. But it's just that idea of when the blinds fall off, the scales fall off your eyes, when you're no longer trying to guard people's perception of you as much kind of your true self comes. So that's what happens a lot at our events, and the guys are better for it, right? It's not a and that's the thing. It's not just hard for the sake of being hard either, right? It's not just putting people down or making you push ups until you throw up. It's purposeful, to the point where you do things that lead you to deeper understanding of yourself, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a Christ follower,
and hopefully forge some good relationships with other men in that process too. I know personally, I've seen a lot of friendships develop in my own life because of things that I've done with other Ironcenturion men. You had a group of guys over on Monday night because it's like, well, we do Ironcenturion stuff together, so let's get together outside of this and be a part of each other's lives. And we sat around and had a really good time together on Monday night, and talking about good theological things and playing poker. So
yeah, and actually we put a lot of emphasis on that. We prefer you to come to an Ironcenturion event with someone you already know. It is designed to be a catalyst event to give you an experience that you can share together and then talk about afterwards. If you don't have someone that'll come with you, that's okay. Come anyway. But we even incentivize it. If you come with a buddy or two or three, we will do our best. In fact, we've had a whole group of people come, and we put them all on one team together, all one unit. So they got to spin and go through everything together and do it together so they could forge deeper memories. And
that's really neat to watch too, from an instructor standpoint, to watch those guys really struggling through the material together and coming out on the other side as a team. What would you say, Michael, because I know this is a question we get a lot, we have pastors out there listening, to this. Are we a threat to churches? Let's just go ahead and get that cat out of the bag.
That's really good. And I hope that nothing that we said early on would indicate in any way that we are, because we did mention our experience, or Tim, you mentioned your experience with some men's ministry at a church. We have no desire to replace that. We believe every church should evaluate for themselves how they should do men's ministry, and we'd hope that they'd have a thriving, vibrant one. We don't want to tell men to come to church less. Some of our weekend events do go over a Sunday morning occasionally. And so we say, hey, this is like a Sunday to spend and do church here, but we really want to develop you into more of a leader so that as you go back to your church, you're now more involved at your church. So we would hope that men's ministry pastors or senior pastors or church pastors would see this as a place to send men for a once a year event or something that they could come to and have that catalyst moment, and deepen relationships, deepen opportunities that will then be impactful within their church and their community. And in no way do we want to discourage or detract from what churches are doing when they're doing it really well.
Yeah, we definitely think the discipleship role falls to the church. I think that's not debated on anybody on our team. We just are trying to provide a supplement to that. For guys like us that need to have that outdoor experience, to need to be able to connect with the Lord in the creation that he made, right? I think we see that in Jesus' example of his leading of the disciples, where they're out on a fishing boat or they're out sitting around a campfire one morning, on the shore of the lake. And there's a reason for that, right? Jesus knew those men. Jesus knew those men's hearts and minds and souls needed that. And I don't think that's changed 2,000 years later. And unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of opportunities within the church to get those types of experiences. So we offer a supplement to that. We offer a chance for guys to get back into those things and there's a real longing in their hearts. Like you can see it when the guys show up on a Friday night or whatever, because they're just like, I don't know what's about to happen to me, but I'm excited about it. Right. And they're excited about that prospect of what we have to offer. And it's been neat to watch.
That's true. We do keep some mystery wrapped up around what happens at our events. Even our advanced marketing doesn't tell you everything. And that's on purpose. That adds to some of the adversity. But we're not for every man. And we've said that from the very, very, very beginning. There are men who are not bent or have proclivities the same way we do. They don't lean the same direction. And that's that's okay. That's fine. It doesn't make you less of a man. There are, though, a significant, it seems to me, set of men who really enjoy this kind of stuff and find it deeply worshipful and meaningful and relationship building.
Mm-hmm. And that's been reflected I can share some of our I was at least responsible for some of our initial surveys that we gave out. I don't know if you guys remember sitting around
I remember those
a Whataburger the Whataburger table and just reading those, and one says I would like for there to be less military style and push-ups, and then okay, well, what's the next one say? I love the push-ups. That was great. Make it more military. What do we do?
So now we have some events that are clearly military-ish themed, and there's more push-ups at those. And then we have some that are more outdoor wilderness bushcraft themed, survival themed, and there's little to no push-ups at those.
Right. But I mean, the important thing to point out, right, is at all of those, we are underscoring the each of our 4 principles and teaching those in a very real and relevant way that connects, that ties the event that we're doing in some form or fashion, in a storyline or what have you. And those those are really the core, right? They're there to get that stuff. And it can be a shock to the system sometimes, just in having to shift gears from learning, I thought I was here for a Bible study and I'm sleeping on the dirt and it's freezing. Right. So, but then you get to kind of pull back from that and be like, here's how we love deeply and care for the guy beside us and offer our extra coat. Jesus says, if you see, did you, I was naked and you clothed me. I was hungry and you gave me food. That's how I know you love me. And then watching that happen, like in real life with guys, with each other, people that show up unprepared and the guys that show up prepared, sharing their stuff. Again, just a really cool way for those things to come together.
Yeah. And one of the other ways too, because, we looked at some of our early on, development talks of like, how do we want this to look and how do we not want it to look? One of our influencers, not influencers, but mentors really helps come up with this concept of look at Promise Keepers, right? Like Promise Keepers filled up stadiums back in the 90s. And what was their impact? And then we all just kind of sat around and looked at each other like crickets. So we didn't want to be this like adult birthday party, right? Where we just did fun stuff for a weekend and sent guys on their happy way. So we've been super intentional over the years about developing that discipleship mindset, right, among the guys that come. And even after you leave for a weekend, you're given a packet of like 6 weeks worth of like follow-up materials that we ask you to go through and continue to reflect on some of those spiritual principles we've talked about over the course of the weekend. But there are also legions, right? We haven't talked about those, and I know we're getting a little bit long in the tooth in this episode, but wanted to talk about legions briefly because I think by the time this episode releases, we'll be live in 2 cities. And legions are a once a month opportunity for us to get together and do on a small scale some of the things we like to do on a larger scale twice a year in our events. But it's a Saturday morning deal on the second Saturday of the month. We'll meet from 5:30 in the morning to 7 in the morning. So you can be back in time to get to your kids' soccer games and everything else you have going on. But you still have that dedicated time with other men to do 3 things. We exercise, we teach a skill, and we are very intentional about praying for one another in a way that focuses on how do I follow Jesus more closely? How does he transform me into a man that pursues after his heart? Please help me find my Aunt Susie's cat and those types of prayer requests, right? Like they're real cut to the heart prayer requests of, men. And the cool thing is, since we set that expectation early, we've seen men actually share openly and honestly about those things. And we've actually been able to have real engaging conversations with men about where they're at, and not just these surface level, put on a smile and go to church on a Sunday morning type of conversations. So we're growing in those areas. So if you think that Saturday morning thing sounds like something you'd like to jump into as well, more information is on our website about those. But we continue to try to find ways to increase that discipleship value that men are getting from Ironcenturion. So it's not just an adult birthday party, as we said about, other men's organizations that might not have had as lasting impact as we hoped.
we hope you've enjoyed this kind of look behind the curtain into who Ironcenturion is, why Ironcenturion is, where we came from. Ruedi, it's awesome to have you here with us. We should do this more often. In fact, Ruedi, would you like to close us out?
Sure thing. So thanks for joining us on the Ironcenturion podcast. It's a Christ-centered adventure into leadership, manliness, and brotherhood.
Nailed it.
Thank you for listening to the Ironcenturion podcast. We're thankful for the support of listeners like you who support this podcast through donations. If you'd like to be a part of our support team, please visit ironcenturion.org/donate. For more information on what it means to be a leader for Christ or how you can get involved, check out ironcenturion.org.